I think that one way of looking at this whole question of political transformation in the Arab world and beyond in the Muslim majority countries is to ask first, before focusing on the transition, go back a little bit and ask how authoritarianism was established, because of the mechanics of autocracy and the way in which religion was instrumentalized and religious groups and Islamist doctrine was used. It helps to explain a lot of the dynamics, I think, of transition today. I'm not suggesting that the authoritarian past of these various countries creates an exact path to any kind of future, far from it, but I do think the constraints of the past are very important. In that regard, I would suggest that, well, this ties very much into the project that we've been talking about today. I would suggest that that authoritarian regimes existed not merely through the use of force, not merely by relying on the very powerful security apparatuses of these countries, but also by using the protection of the state and the institutions of the state to provide protection and patronage to groups whose calculation would be that, subjected to a free and unfettered democratic process, they might be politically or physically obliterated. And that very much ties into the three groups that we've been talking about today: secular women's groups in particular, secular and liberal intellectuals and the intelligentsia, the professional business classes in these countries, and religious minorities, or ethnic minorities as well, whether we're talking about Berbers in Algeria, Kurds in Iraq, and so on. They all had reason to believe or fear, particularly when we're talking about North Africa, that the transformation of their countries into democracies would expose them to an open political process in which they might actually lose. And there is a basic rule, and I think the transitology literature is useful in this regard, and that is, for a successful transition, the winners in the transition process, those who have the most to gain, must provide guarantees of some kind. Credible civil rights protections, institutional protections, and the like, to the potential losers, those who have perceived that the protection that had gotten from the previous regime will be removed, and they will be exposed to the tyranny of the majority. And so, in order to sort of overcome that fear, and this is really what we're talking about here in terms of Tunisia and Egypt, we're talking about the fear, particularly of the losers in the process, and where they will end up in the political process in a democratic polity. You really have to have some sort of process of negotiation that creates an institutional and legal basis by which all key groups can transit from a protection racket of the authoritarian regime to a protection racket for the democratic regime. And that means coming to terms with fundamental issues about civil rights, about collective versus individual notions of political community. These things have to be negotiated, and the instrument for that negotiation differs, but the basic arena is the arena of constitutionalism. And I think this is critical. And in that regard, I'm going to say something that's going to differ a little bit from our previous speaker, our chairperson, and that is, or our commander-in-chief, and that is to say that, as far as I'm concerned, the real obstacle, particularly in the Arab world, to making this transition from authoritarian protectionism to democratic protectionism is the lack of consensus among the key groups as to how to define political community and the notion of civil and political rights.